Hey everyone, we'll get started here in just a few minutes. Thanks for joining us for office hours. While we're waiting for people to filter in, would you mind maybe posting where you're joining from and we can say hello? All right, here we are. I'm in front of the camera this time, which is a little bit different, but happy to join Mike here. My name's Mitch, for those of you who haven't met, and happy to be here for office hours. We do it the first Wednesday of every month. We just kind of open our doors and say, hey, if you have questions that you're stuck on, feel free to jump in and ask those, and we'll do our best to help. So that said, you're in the chat already, so feel free to drop any questions if you want us to get ahead of those. And then just a couple housekeeping things. We are streaming to both Teams and YouTube. Those of you on Teams, if you have a question where you're like, hey, I want to chat with someone, I want to talk and come off mute, you're welcome to raise your hand and we can allow that. Those of you on YouTube, you guys just have chat. So lesson learned, next time get in the Teams meeting, right? But yeah, we actually do have a question already that we got sent ahead of time that we can jump into, but feel free to line them up after that. So question was from Tanya here. It was good to see, by the way, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Midwest unite. Yeah, we're not too far off, but sometimes we've had people from international and way far away. So
Yep.
Kind of depends on the month. The question from Tanya was, I have 3 SharePoint lists that my Power App patches to. I want to keep users from creating, editing, and viewing items on those lists in SharePoint. So they can only be added via the app and no editing once created, except using a deep link for one list/specific record. How can I set permissions so that they can use the app, but not see/use the list items if they go into site contents to find the list? So she wants it all to be shrouded just behind this app and not allow anyone to go poking around into the list.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I think one of the first things I would poke around about would be, is this an opportunity to use something like Dataverse? Because that's going to give you much more ability to control what people can do directly and can see directly. It's much more robust. So you might even look at something like Dataverse for Teams, if that makes sense, if you need to go a free route. But that would be probably the first thing that I would ask. So no licenses is Tanya's response. So I would still ask the question, can we justify it? If you really can't get licenses, I would still investigate Dataverse for Teams. So that would mean you would build your app within the context of a team. So all the people would need to be on a given team, and you would get access to Dataverse. You could build basically a Canvas app on top of that Dataverse data. And so then thereby basically people don't have a SharePoint site to go to get at that. If you really need to use SharePoint, ultimately, I think you might look at an approach where you could serve the data up to your Power App, maybe from a flow, and use that flow to retrieve data, and the flow would run under the context of a service account that would have access, and then you would thereby remove all of the access that your users have directly to the SharePoint site. But that's obviously a much more complex thing.
Because inherently lists, it's like if you have access to it, someone can go poking around and see it.
Absolutely. And the thing that you need to understand about SharePoint is it's got its own user access and permission scheme built into it, and it's intended to be used a certain way. And if you're surfacing SharePoint in a Canvas app, for example, the baseline intent is that you're going to let SharePoint be your permissions configuration, and you're not doing anything special otherwise. So Tanya had a kind of a follow-up question. Can I move it to Teams for Dataverse if I already have it built? So the answer is yes. You could move the Canvas app proper to Dataverse for Teams. I think you can import it, but the reality is if you use Dataverse for Teams and tables or entities become your underlying data structure, you're going to have a lot of rebuilding to do anyways. So you might be better off building the structural screens and things like that inside of Dataverse for Teams, and then if you have specific controls or components or something like that, you could potentially copy paste them in or import them through a component library or something like that. She also followed up with that she has a service account but doesn't know how to use it yet. So that's something I think we may or may not have some blog posts out there and maybe some other videos that talk about leveraging a service account. And they can be very useful in terms of, so think of scenarios where you need something to happen that does require a additional license for Power Automate, for example, maybe to connect to Dataverse. You can run things in a flow under the guise of a service account owner, and that service account can be the one that holds the license. And there are all kinds of other implications about how you connect to that and things like that, which I think you have another follow-up question. We'll talk about that a little bit. But basically, you would create your flow as the service account. So oftentimes what we'll see is people will sometimes log in with the service account to create their flow and then make themselves their user an additional owner on the flow. And basically, you would need to configure all of the connections in the flow to use the service account connectors. And so that's essentially what you would do, and then that flow can run as that user.
Yep. So just to distill it down, lists, you're going to be able to see, people are going to be able to see if they have access to a list and data stored there. They're going to be able to get to it in some regard, unless you create a layer of separation with a service account or go the Dataverse route.
Right. Now, I have seen scenarios where people are less concerned about people seeing any content in SharePoint, and in those scenarios, usually it's something where people have access to create and edit items on the list that they have created. And so that's another you're probably familiar with that setting in the advanced settings of a SharePoint list or library. That's something that has been used. So if somebody does find their way to the list, they can only do damage to a limited extent, right? But your question was a bit more restrictive in terms of, I really don't want them to even know that stuff exists. Mm-hmm. And if that's what you intend, I would strongly suggest looking at something like Dataverse.
All right. We have one more from that we got sent ahead of time, and then we'll get to Tabari's question. The second one from Tanya was, I have another list created by a flow that likewise should not be added or edited by other means, but records can be viewed by all users if they find the list. The flow currently shows me as the creator for all items because I own the flow, but I'm hoping to transfer that to a service account. So don't want to hard code anything related to creator name per se. How would these permissions differ? And how can I ensure site owners can still see/edit everything if necessary?
Yeah, so this is another good question related to the service account scenario. So think of your flow in terms of two separate steps instead of a single one. So you would have an initial flow that would be the one triggered by whatever action the user takes. So whether or not maybe they're updating a record somewhere, updating a list item, or maybe they're for a selected item, calling the flow. I don't know how you're doing it, but that would be executed in the context of that user. And then that flow would be set up to call a child flow. So you're getting into a scenario where you would need to use a solution to be able to like allow your flows to call each other. But the child flow would run under the guise of the service account. And so the child flow would be the one that would actually do the writes to your data source. And so your users would not have to have permissions to write or delete or anything like that in your SharePoint list, but the service account would, and then that child flow would do all of the real work. So your users kick off that initial flow, and then that flow calls the child flow. And that's a way, again, to get around a little bit of the licensing challenge. So if let's say your data was not in SharePoint and was instead in Dataverse, for example, your users would maybe kick off that initial flow that would kick off the child flow, which is the one that actually has the license and ability to connect to Dataverse. But again, that's extra complex to set up when, depending on your scenario, licenses may be cheaper to deal with.
I have to say, I love child flows so much that I wrote a blog called 3 Reasons Why Child Flows Are the Best Flows. So that's right there in chat.
Yep.
Helpful if you haven't dug into child flows before. Yeah.
Yep.
They're the best flows according to me.
Yep. Yeah, so they're very useful. So Tanya, to expand on your statement about using flows instead of patch, that's essentially what we're saying, is let that flow be that layer in between. The other question you had was, how do I let owners still have access to everything? The reality is, if they're owners, you're going to, they have different permissions on that list or library than everyone else does anyways, and so they would still have access. I assume you would leave them in that ownership role, in which case they'd be able to access the SharePoint site and list directly and do things with it if they needed to.
All right, next question over on Teams. Tabari asks, I created an app for inventory tracking, and we're patching 360 items to a database. We found that this was really slow, and we ended up patching to our database via one patch with a single JSON string, then using a flow to execute a procedure that materializes the table. Is there a better way to make this faster?
Then using a flow to execute a procedure that materializes the table. So I guess my follow-on question is, what is there's two, it seems like there's 2 parts to this. One is I need to save a whole bunch of records at once. And then there's a question about materializing the table. So I assume that means we're getting updates back and rendering them to the user. I think that would be my question there. So we'll let Tabari respond. And also, you're using the term database. I don't know if that means SQL Server or something else. So you might want to expand on that a little bit. What connector are you using?
Like I mentioned before, if you'd prefer to come off mute, we can allow that too. Just feel free to raise your hand.
And while we're waiting for that from Tabari, quick follow-up, Tanya, to your question. You'd heard changing item level permissions affects owner permissions. That is not true. If you're an owner of a site, you still see everything. Okay, so Tabari says, essentially parsing the JSON into a table, and it is SQL Server. So a quicker way to take that JSON and convert it into a table inside of your app is what I'm gathering from that. I don't know, Matt.
Look, we have Matt Dressel cameoing in the chat.
He might have an answer.
He can unmute. Matt, everybody can hear you. We normally have.
Can hear me.
Yeah.
Is it transactional in nature? It's inventory management. Are you changing the status of what your inventory is from being available to not available, where it's super critical? If not, send it to a flow and have the flow make the update. If this isn't meant to be an immediate, it's got to happen immediately, one option would be just send it to a flow to do it. Another thing I would say is that you can also create, I think it's called a virtual table is the right term. I can't remember if I'm using the right terminology. That goes to SQL Server in a Power Apps environment, and then you could update the Power App. I believe the way that actually works would be it would basically cache the change, and so you would you would basically be updating the stuff in the Dataverse, quote unquote, the shared table, and then it would be syncing back to the SQL Server.
Dataverse manages the writes.
Correct. Yeah. I also think that a patch, using the word patch implies that you're using Canvas, not something else. Patch in its own right is problematic because it's going to try to update each object by its key individually, rather than doing like an update where these 4 things are right. I think that they're like using the SQL connector in Power Automate. I think there's better options to make that happen, up into and including sending it to a store proc that would just go do it. So
it
I
looks
think
like
really,
she came off mute. Maybe we'll see if she has a couple cents to share.
Yeah, so essentially what we're doing is we're trying to update inventory counts, and there's like a bunch of them, like 360. And so we found that the patch to the database was taking about 2 minutes.
Yep.
And so we and exactly that's what it was doing. It was going through every single record and trying to make a connection to the database.
Yep.
And so that's why
find the record and then try to make an update individually. Yep.
Yep. And so we sent it via one string of JSON and basically used a flow to parse that into a table, and that works fine. But I was just wondering if there was a better way to do that without having to go through so many hoops.
Wait a minute. So you're saying you did the one where you sent it to a flow and then it did it, and then it was it still 2 minutes?
No, it was maybe a few seconds, if that.
Got it. Okay. And you're changing inventory things, which means that it's really important to you. I'm saying this and it's a question, so I don't mean it as a statement. It's important to have that happen immediately, right? Because you don't want anyone else in the system to think that there's inventory on hand for whatever you're doing. Is that fair?
Well, it's the immediacy is not that important. Is the most important thing is the user experience when they are entering it in, so that
not waiting 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And having confidence that when they do make the update's been made and it's going to happen, even if it takes X amount of time, it's going to happen for sure.
Yes.
So and I assume you're using a Canvas app?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think the flow is your best bet. I think what you're doing is your best bet. I don't know whether or not the exact thing that you're doing is the exact best, but yes, what I think you're doing is probably a really good option. I am not as familiar with what the commands are and the functions are for the SQL connector in a Canvas app. So there may be another option for the SQL connector within Canvas apps that might be better. But if I had to guess based on my understanding of what I know is available for Dataverse and some other connectors, I would guess what you're doing is probably the best you can do.
It looks like he just dropped, probably on accident, but maybe we'll pick it back up when they get back. So we do have one more question on YouTube that we'll get to in a second. For anyone else watching, feel free to drop any questions that you have in chat. The prompt that I usually like to give is, if you're looking, like we're beginning of 2023, sometimes we set goals for the end of the year. What's your goal and what is preventing you from getting there related to Office 365? Or is there anything holding you back that you need help figuring out? But yeah, with that, we'll go to Matt Kahn decided to cameo over on YouTube, participating in the questions here. Does setting an advanced setting on a library, like allow creators to only see/create their content, mess with an owner's ability to manage a flow on that library?
The quick answer is no. It does not.
Okay.
That setting specifically has to do with the content that's there, and if the flow is running in the context of an owner, a user who actually is an owner of the site or the list, they'll be able to see and act on any of the content that's in that list, regardless of who created it. Yeah, simple as that.
Cool.
Good question.
All right, there's no more outstanding questions, so we'll just kind of
So-
hang out. Oh,
Hey, so I don't have a question, but I was going to type it up and then I decided I'll just come off mute. For Tanya's question about the owner stuff, what Mike said is true, but the term owner is changing over time, and Microsoft is deprioritizing the distinction between site collection administrators and owners, and they're making it kind of fuzzy. Site collection owners
Site collection
have
administrators.
permission. Site collection. I was even making it worse.
Admins.
Sorry. They have access to everything always. You cannot take away their permissions. They can have 0 permissions on the entire site, and you give them site collection admin, and they have access to everything, no matter what other permission is. An owner, so the owner group within the site is just a group within a site. If I create broken permissions and remove group owner permissions, they don't have permissions to that, even though they're the owner of they're in the owner group of the site, which gets really confusing because Microsoft obfuscates a lot of that because they don't talk about multiple groups. They just talk about visitors or full control, read and contribute or whatever, right? Edit. And so it gets a little bit confusing and hairy. The important distinction to be is that if you're a site collection administrator, you have rights to that site, period. Doesn't matter. You can't take them away. You've got everything. If you're an owner, you're almost there, but you're not quite all the way there.
Yep. But specifically, the setting that Matt, for example, asked about is an advanced setting on the library that is different than removing an owner's permissions from a library or list.
Yeah, I was talking about Tanya's.
Yeah.
That's where I was going at, but yep.
Similar but different, related. Clear as mud.
thumbs up from Tanya. Cool. Anything else? Emma, want to give us some hold music while people are thinking of any other questions? Otherwise, I'm sure we can manifest something to talk about.
I wanted to ask more about the SQL thing in flows because I haven't done a whole lot of those connections in a flow, and like Matt may or may not have experience with it, but passing in Tabari talked about passing in it like a JSON table, materializing it into a table, and then passing it in to something for SQL Server to do with it. And of course that could be a stored procedure, but one of the things I wondered about was like what makes the most sense, what would be the quickest thing to pass into it. So like, and can you make it quicker by thinking ahead in your flow and passing in some construct that's cheaper to deal with from SQL Server's perspective?
Yeah, unfortunately, probably not, because the reality is that JSON is the thing that they all know how to deal with. So passing in, like,
really you need to make your SQL Server proc understand how to deal with the JSON object.
If you want to make it, if you want to use a store proc, which like generally, my opinions about store, like know my opinions about store procs. But that's a whole nother conversation. But there is an interesting topic that I get your opinion on, and I would changing the parameters for a flow that's called from Power Apps is not great in my experience.
Yes, you have to tear down and rebuild. It sucks.
So would you always recommend to only ever send a JSON string?
Only if I intended on creating some sort of helpers or library for the rest of my team to be able to use that made it easy for them to build that JSON string for every child flow that I was going to call. Otherwise I'll go through the pain and rebuild the pieces of my flow so that people can just pass in first name, last name, date of birth.
Interesting.
So we got a comment on YouTube. I think it was when you were talking about your opinion on stored procs. They said, MG says, I want to hear that opinion.
Let's do it.
So that we're like way deep. We're way deep out of low code, no code land at the moment.
Let's hit hold. We're going technical here, folks. So anyone, you're more than welcome to bring it back up, and it does not have to be such a technical question. But
yeah, this is going to be about as technical as you can possibly get.
Let's go.
So store procs in general. So first of all, I'll go through for anybody who's paying attention and cares, but doesn't necessarily know all the details. In a database server, you can create what are called store procedures. They have been around forever. They've been heavily used, and they're one of the ways that you can develop code and modules within a database. So it's actually an object in the database. And so what you can do then is you can do things like, I give you access to run this store procedure. I don't give you access to do something to the table. And so then use the store procedure, and the store procedure does things like verify the inputs and outputs and
kind of like a child flow.
It's very similar. Child flow, a function, an operation or an action. You can think of it like an action, like you're developing your own action. And they're like, I've worked on lots of systems that have lots of them. I've worked on lots of them that don't have any of them. There's a philosophical difference in some ways. There are definitely reasons to have a store procedure. I'm not like never use them ever, but I definitely would try to avoid them, primarily because they are a source of pain related to obfuscation. So database administrators will love them because they can get their hands on more of what's going on. Developers oftentimes hate them because the database administrator won't let them get access to them and change them. So it's like this, there's a bunch of social things, there's a bunch of technical things, there's a bunch of like lots of things. Store procedures have the ability to do what's called compilation. So you can compile a store procedure to make it super fast based on inputs and outputs. You can make sure that across, like, so let's say that I have 15 different apps that are all using the same database. Someone could make the case that I'm going to do all store procs so that in all of those 15 different applications, I just can use the store procs, right? On the other end of it, a lot of other people would say the database shouldn't even, end applications shouldn't even care about the database. I'm going to create a service layer between the two, or a microservice that's going to manage all of that interaction, and it cares about all of that stuff, and the rest of you don't, and just always use that service layer or that layer in between for all of that action.
Give us the hot take, Matt.
Don't use store procedures if you can avoid them. Like, if you're a developer and you're developing a new application, don't use store procedures unless you have to. That's the hot take.
Love it.
I think they're much more difficult to manage, and for people that are developers, honestly, to come along and interpret or understand what you did in them. They're much more difficult than .NET code, C# or whatever you want to use.
The last thing is that, like, you definitely cannot do everything in a store proc. Like, you just don't have enough detail. It's too far down in the stack. So you're going to have logic somewhere else anyways, and why would you want logic in 15 places and not just one? So anyways, Tanya has a question for you guys.
Yeah. So she says, is there a resource regarding service account with Dataverse license flows? If users without a license can access the Dataverse to create, edit, view records, that would be perfect. Next version of the app. She's searching for our videos on service accounts. I don't know. I feel like it's either on deck or
we might not
quite out there yet. Like, I know somebody on the team is working on a service accounts thing, like running your flows with service accounts.
Well, it's related to the child flow. Like, the child flow can run as a service account. So I think that's all we've done right now.
Okay. So the one that I'm familiar with that I know is in the hopper is simply somebody saying, okay, I'm going to create this flow as a service account and run it as a service account. Like the simple, like show you how to do that basically. So be on the lookout for that if it's not out there.
Can we still answer the question? If users without a license can access the Dataverse, that would be perfect. There is that way to do it, but it's extra hoops to jump through, and I don't know if it's worth it. You have to make the case. I would, if you're really concerned about licenses, I would
go the Dataverse for Teams route and build your app in the team first. That would be my first attempt to get Dataverse without a license. There are shortcomings. There are certain things that you cannot do with Dataverse for Teams that you can do with full Dataverse, but like I would have to know way more about your solution or your requirements to tell you whether or not it would or wouldn't work for you.
So the only other thing I would say is that I think we're all making the assumption that Tanya's talking about using a Canvas app to connect and then trying to use the flow to get the licensing.
Right.
And I 100% agree.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure that's what she means, and that's definitely
She
not. I
says
wouldn't
yes.
do it.
Yep.
Yeah. The thing I would say is that if you're concerned about licensing and you can get one license, it's Microsoft makes it really hard, but the prices on per app licensing is not that bad.
Well, and the other thing to look at would be the pay-as-you-go option.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know what that would. It would depend on usage, obviously, but that's another alternative. The one thing I will say about like the Dataverse for Teams experience, like when you're building an app, yes, you have Dataverse, but the experience of building the app is very much like building a Canvas app. Like it's basically a Canvas app. It's not a model-driven app. So that's a distinction. Like if you upgrade or you graduate all the way to Dataverse proper, you have the ability to build model-driven apps, which are much different than building Canvas apps and have powerful abilities in its own right. But that's quite a bit different than Canvas app. So if you're in Dataverse for Teams, the experience you'll have from a developer standpoint will be much more familiar to you if you're a Canvas app developer.
So she's asking she's saying $170 a person. They have 1,600 users. That can add up pretty quick.
It should.
Yeah, but the per app license is it's not that. It's $82. Like list price is $82. Like it's so per app license, not a per user license, but a per app license is $6.90 a person
per month.
Now the limitation per month, yeah. Yep. The limitation is you get it per, like you got to pay that per app or per per environment, per app, whatever. So
put everything, absolutely everything in one app.
In one app, yeah. Yeah.
Like that question, the question about the licensing cost is a very interesting question. Like that's something we're learning how to do is tease out value, right? And understand, like, is this thing I'm building, does it have an ROI? Is it worth spending the money to build it? Is it worth spending the money on licenses for my users to use it? I think when you get up into the thousands of users range, it makes it a really interesting question.
Right. What is the access to the list today costing?
Right.
You.
Yeah.
How much does it cost to fix? Is
Yep.
that?
Yeah.
Right?
What does it cost when somebody touches the list and they're not supposed to?
Right.
Yeah.
It also gets really hard because even that per app plan license, like the conversation we're having it with one of our customers that's very similar to Tanya, a very large organization. They've made the decision that they don't want to have to deal with the management issue of per app licensing. But at the same time, then they start arguing and fighting about the cost of doing a per user license. And
and who's going to pay for it? Yeah.
And who's going to pay for that?
Yeah.
And so it's like, there is no small answer. The real question is, do you want it or do you not? And if you're going to be all in, you're going to be quickly to just buy everybody a per user license and be done.
Yeah. So Tanya, your follow-up is good. Like, so what if this is scaled to a full organization? We're talking tens of thousands of users. And you're hopeful that the tenant level will get licenses for all. Like that's similar to the conversation that Matt was just talking about. And in those scenarios, Microsoft is very interested in onboarding people,
getting usage,
and getting usage in that platform, and so they will cut deals to schlep licenses. That's been our experience. So that would be something like in terms of making the justification for your app and those licenses. One of the things that you should be raising is, hey, is the organization as a whole on board with the Power Platform as a platform of choice for business apps, for example? And what does that mean from an investment standpoint? Are we going to buy licenses for everyone? Because if they solve it at that level and say, yes, we are, then your problem's solved. Like you just need them to go buy the licenses.
She says it's above her pay grade, but I don't believe her.
Absolutely.
Lead from where you are. Push it along. You can do it. We believe in you. It's a good push.
Yeah.
I'm going to pause real quick and just set the stage again. you're just joining us, this is office hours. We do this once a month, every Wednesday, or the first Wednesday of every month. We just open up our doors to have you ask any questions that you have regarding modern workplace, communication, collaboration, Office 365, all those sorts of topics. We love digging into those. So you're more than welcome to drop any questions that you have in chat. And
apparently we've expanded it to deep technical topics like stored procedures in SQL Server.
Yeah, let's get really technical today. And hoping they catch up to the citizen devs among us and don't shut us down. Yeah.
Yeah, like that is a thing. Larger organizations, once they get wind of something that may be going on, one of the options is to shut it down for sure. Get scared of it.
That's the normal path of operation usually.
Yeah.
But we're involved with a large organization right now that is about to give it a big hug.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah.
And so don't lose all hope.
Yep. It helps to be like in your position, you're an evangelist for it. I think in many ways we are. Our team uses Office 365 and the Power Platform and a lot of stuff that we do. And we certainly...
Are they hiring?
We certainly understand all the values and the benefits of it and the downside, right? We don't shy away from the from the fact that there are strange motivators involved and some things that are not fully baked.
We got a question on YouTube from MG. Have you guys worked on SPFx development? We sure have.
Absolutely.
I was fooling around with it a little.
Are we going
today.
super technical again?
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know.
MG today?
MG, expand on the question. The short answer is yes. We have used it. We have some small things in play right now for some of our customers that we're building to do things like Google Analytics tracking.
It's just an application customizer that throws a Google tag into the site so that they can track analytics and whatnot.
And we've done some other custom UX things in the past.
We had like an instance where we had some like KPI indicators that we wanted to display in a pretty fashion. So we just made one that read from a list.
We've done probably 4 or 5 different things, or like the last thing I did, a customer had a vendor who was developing it and I was doing the code reviews and making sure they did it right.
I did a custom forms application basically for a customer that wanted to use document sets in SharePoint before document sets had a modern UX or UI, and even the modern UX for them isn't what they need really. And so that's an SPFx solution basically that allows you to view stuff in a document set in a certain way that makes more sense to the user. More interactive, better UX.
MG says, I just started to explore it. Do you guys have a preferred framework? I heard the de facto is React. Yeah, Microsoft is definitely heavy in the React space. All the SPFX stuff is built on React. You can use different things inside of it, but your best bet is to learn your way around React and build components in the modern React way, and understanding that will make your development process way easier if you have some React knowledge.
The other thing I would say about it is that recognize that you're doing really heavy custom dev. Like it's for people who may have been around SharePoint for a very long time, doing custom solutions in SharePoint is like you have to be a super .NET, JavaScript, SharePoint, know everything person. You're not going to take just somebody that has a little bit of knowledge about one thing and go, yep, you can do it. SPFX is like it's React hardcore, and it's JavaScript hardcore, and it's SharePoint, and all of these things kind of all baked into one big thing.
Yep. Yeah, you got to know the search API, list API.
Yep. My only other suggestion is use like Microsoft's. I think they renamed it, but it used to be called Fabric or Fluent. Yeah,
it's Fluent UI.
Use their styles if you can, so it kind of matches the SharePoint look and feel, and it can inherit the colors and everything that you need. and only go custom CSS when absolutely required.
The other thing I would say about it is that that same template Microsoft is using for a lot of their other customizations. So if you were to learn how to do SPFx development, when you talk about Power Apps component development, it's very similar. And when you talk about Power BI custom component, it's very similar. Like they're not the same, but it's all, that is like what Mitch said about them.
So Matt, you're talking about
betting on it.
PCF specifically in that world, right?
PCF and PCF in the Power Apps world.
Component framework.
That's right. So less people get confused between just a regular old Power App component.
Yep.
This is this is a straight up custom component.
Correct.
I've seen it making rounds on like LinkedIn and social circles lately that you can now do anything possible, like anything with code in Power Apps, but it is very technical and it is not citizen developer friendly in regards to customizing things. Sure, you might be able to find some frameworks that can do some functionality for you that you don't have to necessarily know how to use, but it's a slippery slope.
In one of the active projects I have right now, I'm actually using 2 PCF components from the community.
Yeah, nice. MG says, guess I'll have to work with Node/npm again. Yeah, fortunately, a lot of the SPFX stuff is like baked together
done
where
for you.
You pretty much just have to download their package and start it, and then you're kind of in your own little space. You don't necessarily have to know how to maneuver Node. NPM, sure. Yeah, if you want custom packages in there. But it's not too bad once you get up and running.
We got another fun question from Tanya. This ought to be a good one. Is there a way for us to create a SharePoint or internal web page that accepts user input, parses an XML document, performs a calculation, and then presents an answer to the user? I could do this easily in JavaScript or PHP or really any number of utilities, but I can't seem to figure out how to do this here in our tenant using MS Forms, Power Automate, or SharePoint. I either get hung up on parsing the XML or presenting the answer as HTML, or both. I don't really need to save the output anywhere. I just want to give an answer to the user, open to any ideas. Basically, the user provides parameters, for example, grade and location, and files are searched to return data calculations.
SPFX, maybe. Like you could do, yeah. You can't do
You
it
could definitely do it
with what you say, like out of the box SharePoint, or like you could go the Power Apps route, but MS Forms, no, you can't respond to the user in a helpful way. But you could put something on a SharePoint page that click here to upload document, submit, boom,
So
spit something back out.
Do we have to have XML, I wonder? Like, is that a...
Yeah, that was going to be my question, because the reality is that's going to be your biggest problem. Like, XML is not normal. You can parse it. So the big thing, if you wanted to do it as out of the box without doing custom stuff, I would do a Power Automate and a Canvas app. That's what I would do.
Yep.
Because with Power Automate, there is an XML parsing that you can parse the XML, and then you could do something with it. I don't exactly know what you would do with it. Perhaps turn it back into JSON or something so that you can use it in an object that would give you an answer or something. I don't know. But for me, that's probably what I would do if I want to do it super easy, simple, whatever. But then, quote unquote, nice custom thing would be, exactly what you said, SPFX or something.
So my question is the XML document an input or a something you're calculating on, like something you're searching through?
It looked like it was calculating through from what I could understand.
Used in calculations.
Yeah.
Her follow-up was, is SPFX restricted in any way to the normal user? No, they don't know any difference when they're viewing a page if they have access to that.
Yeah, I think she's asking whether or not the normal user can create an SPFX, and the answer is no.
Oh no.
Yeah. So if you to do an SPFX, you have to have tenant level permissions, because you have to have an app catalog. It's a solution that you apply to the tenant, or you can have it created at a site collection, but it is something that gets done, and you have to have agreement and permission from basically a tenant admin.
So that's right. You got to know your way around the code a little bit, and some permissions to get it where you need it to be. But You may think it's no, but again, we believe in you. You can do it. MG says over on YouTube again, just have nightmares with front-end development environment. I hear you. I've been there. In the like real web development world, Docker has been super helpful. It takes a little bit to find your way around that and get set up, but it kind of keeps everything all bundled together and out of the rest of your computer's hair. But again, on the SPFx stuff, once you download it, you say, and you install a generator, and once you install the generator, you run it, say, here's the name of my app, and then it spits out a bunch of files. You go into that folder, say npm start or something, and then it spins up the web server, and it's not much more than that.
Yep, and you can keep your projects separate that way, and as Mitch said, out of the rest of your computer's hair. If you're managing multiple SPFx projects, for example, that can be pretty messy. They all have different requirements or dependencies.
Emma, do you want to throw your question in the ring?
Well, I'm going to pull us from the depths of the deep tech discussion
Good,
with my
please.
question. Well, we've been talking a lot about goals, right? And just automating processes is one of the things we do. And I was wondering, between the three of you, if you have a favorite process you automated last year that helped you reach a goal, maybe it just allowed you to spend more time on.
Yes, I
actual
definitely
work.
do.
All right.
Mine is stupid simple, but it's been awesome. We got a new credit card provider, and
You took mine.
well, let's tag team this. Mike, what was your frustration for me, or what was your directed at me?
What was my frustration directed at you? So, like, as a business, we struggle to release spending reins,
Yep.
right? And so one of the things that has set us free is literally implementing a new tool that allowed us to have the control that we wanted and provide the freedom that we needed.
Yep.
And it built in, so, like, the tool is so great, like it builds in so much more and helps us all like track stuff. So for me, it's like double bonus. Like it unlocked a whole bunch of stuff. And then, by the way, it does a better job of tracking everything than we were ever doing before.
But then Mitch swipes his credit card and forgets to upload a receipt. And then Mike gets on my case after there's like 30 of those things.
Right.
I got tired of going through that enough times. And so I set up, this is like very stupid flow, but all it does is it says, anytime I get an email that has order, receipt, invoice, I don't know, probably one more thing. Anytime it has that, just forward it to the credit card provider, and that has an automatic, like, it deciphers what the receipt is for and tags it, like attaches it to that transaction. So all I have to do is, if it's a regular subscription thing, it'll automatically get tagged and it doesn't need a memo or anything. If it's something other than that, all I have to do is go in and add the memo, and the receipt is automatically attached, and it's...
Which, by the way, I go look at that stuff every so often to reconcile it. And this last time I did was actually earlier this week. And I almost said "holy cow" out loud, because I think all but 3 transactions had receipts on them.
I'm amazing.
And 2 of those 3 that were missing them were mine.
Ha. I got them, you guys. The power of Power Automate does it again. So that was the favorite thing that I automated in the last year. Matt, you got anything?
I don't automate a lot for myself, so I don't really have anything for myself. I just don't do it. I know some other members on our team like automate everything, like like automate everything. I automate. I don't have anything that I do so often, I don't think.
Matt has a very strong work ethic, everyone.
He puts in the man hours when things need to get done.
Right. Giving you what you need.
Yep.
I don't make that many purchases, so I don't have that many expenses on a regular basis. Like, I don't know what you want me to tell you, but I just don't.
Guys, he has yet to adopt the modern workplace mindset where anytime you spend something more than 30 minutes every week, you should automate it.
Okay, I have a follow-up question to that, Mitch. Just thinking back through other businesses I've worked at, would there be a way to, within that automation, make it so that you know which project category it needs to actually get filed into that expense?
So that's an interesting question. So the provider that we use for the card has AI built into their tool already that allows us to categorize things. And so we can set up rules there to help us manage that. So that would be one way to do it. Probably that's where I would start, and then see what falls through the cracks after that.
That vendor also has the ability to create virtual cards, which is really amazing. So you could, like, if we aren't in a business that creates a lot of expenses per project. We just don't have a lot that goes per project. If we were, another thing that we might consider on top of what Mike said is create separate cards for each project. So
Right.
Mitch has 4 cards, one for each project, and use the card that you want, right? And they don't all have to be virtual. Like, literally, it's crazy. Like, you can literally go to the portal and be like, I want to create a new card, I want a physical card, blah, 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 and all of a sudden it's done. And Mitch will get a new card, or somebody else will get a new card,
Yeah.
and it's got a limit on it, daily, weekly, monthly, by type of purchase. Like, anyways,
Yeah.
we
It's a
should
great
get
tool.
sponsored by them.
Yeah, we're in the process of like legitimately getting an affiliate link with them, simply because we wanted one, because we thought it was great. It was not
Absolutely.
done by them, so
Yeah.
we're in process of that. Sounds like Divi. The one we're talking about is Ramp. They're like, they got me with, it was like a Facebook ad or something. It was very much simplify your spending at your business with Ramp, and I fell for it. And I was one of the first times where it was like legitimate. I'm glad I fell for an ad online.
Yeah,
moments.
and it has. There hasn't been anything that it doesn't have that I have wanted.
Just to be clear, I don't know that it'll work for every customer,
Right.
every company, because it does have restrictions for how you get created. We have a different fiscal thinking than probably a lot of organizations, so it may not work for everyone. But oh my goodness, like I've experienced in other large organizations using places that do have similar features and functionality, and some of it probably is Fortune 500 size companies just have a bunch of blue red tape anyways. But also the tool just seems to be clunky and not great. Like,
Yeah.
this is
Well, and
it's,
a lot of the ones that I have experience with are products of the bank that the business
correct.
is doing business with, right? And
Comerica.
right, exactly. And they're not as I'll say this, they're generally
They're
good
not
at
invested in creating that.
they're generally good at a lot of things, but not really great at any one thing. Whereas this Ramp, that's all they do, and they're really good at it. So
Honestly, with all the advertising that's been going on about GPT, it feels like that every time you send a receipt to them, because it's like magic. It's like you send a receipt and all of a sudden they're like, cool, all done. Like, well, how did you do that?
Yeah.
That was the worst image I ever took in my life. How did you figure out what that
well,
was?
so
and
you know
how
what?
that assigned something?
I've sent some of those, and I have a suspicion that on the ones that are a little bit slower to respond,
They have somebody look at
I
it.
think they get escalated to a team that's actually sitting there looking at stuff. But
It's crazy.
But who knows? It could be AI all the way.
Leave it to me to have taken a super technical chat to GPT. Just saying.
Yeah.
I know we only have 5 minutes left here, but I kind of want us to dive into that conversation. But maybe that'll be a podcast topic.
You know what we should do? We should ask ChatGPT what the problem with stored procedures is.
How about we ask ChatGPT what we should talk about?
Sure.
Go extra meta. No, just quick reminder. Like Emma said, we have about 5 minutes left. If you have any questions, lingering
And they
thoughts,
definitely don't need to be technical.
No, yeah. Feel free to drop them in. I know we have a couple people on the Teams meeting that we haven't heard from. You're welcome to jump in here, and then YouTube as well. MG's been holding us down over there. But ChatGPT.
Yeah.
We've been having fun with it. We have one team member that is really good at coming up with really obscure prompts for it. Just like, tell me a love story about a seagull in a bag of chips or something like that.
Yeah.
And it comes up with it, and it's not the best love story in the world, but it's kind kind of fun.
What is the, this reminds me of what's the Office episode where Michael's doing like typing something in and the computer is repeating.
Me love you a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get out of my O5. Yeah.
I think
Harvey the computer.
my favorite one that our coworker did was the Romeo and Juliet version of Siri and Alexa, the love story between those two. That was pretty creative.
It's been fun to use it from a functional perspective too, just like dropping in, hey, I have this paragraph of text, give it to me more concisely, and it like spits it out, and it's like, oh yeah, that feels better. I was wordy before, so it's everything. Everyone's talking about it right now.
But I dare you to let a 13-year-old use it and expect something great.
Yeah, we're doing our best to make it only an aid to our process of creating things and more of a helper, less of a doer. Okay. We don't see any other questions, but with that, we do, like I said, do this every first Wednesday of every month. So we can work on getting the link to the next one in chat, so you can find a link to that. Also, we have a newsletter that if you want Office 365 tips in your inbox every Thursday, that goes up tomorrow. So if you want that, be sure to get on that. It's at the bottom of pretty much every page on our website. Otherwise, you'll find that under newsletter in the menu. But yeah, we really appreciate you guys stopping by, and it's always fun to chat with the outside world and people that we wouldn't normally get to talk to. So thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.